Hello, I am Wisteria, and I'm here to tell you a story. It is a very good story about a very smart girl. Her name is Marcela. She is clever Marcela. Clever Marcela is a tale, an old famous tale, but gathered together in the book The Serpent Slayer and Other Stories of Strong Women. This is by Katrina Chahna. So, today we will learn of clever Marcela. Marcela was working in her father's pumpkin patch, looking pretty as a pumpkin herself, when the king rode by on a fine white horse, hunting for wild pigs. "Hey, girl," he called to Marcela, "get me some water to drink, and be quick about it. Come, see, I am thirsty." "Hey, king," Marcela called back, "you're so grand, and we are so poor. We haven't any cup good enough for you to drink from. I am sure of this. If we had a cup of gold, well, then I'd gladly bring you some water." "Never mind the cup," the king replied, smiling, for he thought he'd never seen a girl so pretty as this poor peasant's daughter. "Just bring me some water, and if it's cool and clean, that will be enough." So Marcella brought him some water in a clay cup that her mother had made. After the king had drunk from it, she looked him straight in the eye and threw the cup hard against the wall of her father's cottage, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The king was shocked. "Now, why would you do that?" he cried angrily. "You know I am of royal blood, the king of this country, and you are nothing but a poor peasant girl. Who are you to act so proud?" Marcella curtsied sweetly and lowered her eyes. "Oh, my king, I broke the cup made for me by my dear dead mother so long ago, because now that you have drunk from it, I wouldn't be able to let it be used by any other." The king could think of nothing to say to this. As a matter of fact, he looked quite flattered. He just smiled at Marcella and went on his way. She's a clever one. Back at the palace, he found he couldn't stop thinking about Marcella and her saucy smile and her pretty eyes. He'd been looking all over the kingdom for a girl clever enough to be his bride. Now perhaps he had found her. As a test, he sent one of his soldiers back to Marcella's pumpkin patch. "Give her this large round bottle, which has a very small neck. Tell the girl to put one of her pumpkins inside without breaking the bottle, and then send it back to me." When the soldier came to Marcella's cottage, he found her sitting outside, sorting seeds and telling stories to entertain her old father. The soldier presented the king's bottle to Marcella and ordered her to put a whole pumpkin inside without breaking the bottle. Marcella's father trembled with fear. "Oh, dear daughter, what kind of a request is this? Oh, not even a sorcerer could fit a pumpkin into a bottle with such a small neck. Now the king will surely have us thrown into prison. Oh, what shall we do? What shall we do?" But Marcella only laughed. "Oh, dear father, don't worry. I know how to please the king of this king of ours." She sent the soldier back to the palace, telling him she didn't have any pumpkins fine enough for the king yet present. But as soon as she did, her father would bring one straight to the palace. Then she planted a seed inside of the bottle. Each day she watered the seed. She let it sit in its sunniest spots in the garden and sang songs to it, until soon the pumpkin plant produced the finest little pumpkin ever seen, sitting snugly inside the king's bottle. "My pumpkin is ready," she said to her father. Take it to the palace tomorrow, and when you see the king, tell him to take the pumpkin out of the bottle without breaking the bottle, and send the bottle home with you so I may grow another. Marcella's father went off to the palace and delivered the pumpkin to the king, along with his daughter's message. When the king saw the pumpkin in the bottle and heard the request, he was sure that Marcella was as clever as she was pretty. Of course, he couldn't take the pumpkin out of the bottle. She was trying to trick him. He decided if he could outwit her in return. Tell your daughter I thank her very much, but I have no use for another pumpkin. Instead of the bottle, I am sending her this sheep. She must sell the sheep for 6 pieces of silver and send me back the money. But it must be carried back to me on the very same sheep. Marcella's father brought the sheep home to his daughter, worrying all the way that the king would throw them into prison, for surely his daughter would never be able to sell the sheep and send it back to the king alive. It was impossible. When Marcella saw the sheep and heard the message, she laughed. Oh, you know, father, this king of ours is quite a clever man. He's almost as clever as I am, and he's handsome as well. I just might have to marry him. Her father begged her to mind her tongue, but Marcella only tossed her head and led the sheep off into the fields. There she sheared off its wool. Then she wove the wool into a fine piece of cloth, which she took to the market and sold for 6 silver pieces. The next day Marcella's father carried the sheep back to the king's palace, the money tied to its neck with a handkerchief. When the king saw that Marcella had again proved more clever than he became a little irritated. Trying once more to outwit her, he sent her a tiny bird, ordering her to make him 7 dinners from it. Marcella listened to the king's message, looked at the tiny bird, which couldn't possibly make even 1 dinner, and thought for 5 minutes. Then she pulled a pin out of her skirt and handed it to her father. Give this to the king, father dear. Ask him to make me a steel frying pan, a knife, and a spit out of it so that I can cook his bird properly. This time the king was forced to admit that he would never outwit the peasant's daughter. He threw up his hands. In all the kingdom, there is no one as clever as your daughter, old man. I think I'll have to marry her. The next day Marcella came to the palace, and she and the king were married in a grand ceremony that lasted 7 days and 7 nights. When the wedding was over, however, the king had a serious talk with his new queen. Now, my dear, I know you are very clever, but I don't want you meddling in my affairs. I am the king, after all, and if I ever hear that you have interfered with my decisions, I shall send you right back to the pumpkin patch. Marcella swore she had no interest in trying to run the affairs of state. After all, I'm just a poor peasant girl, and you are the king, my lord. But the king looked at her with suspicion, for he knew well enough that she was just as able to run the affairs of state as he was. To please her husband, Marcella kept her word and didn't try to meddle in the king's business. But one day 2 men came before the king, begging him to settle their dispute. One man owned a mare, female horse, who had foaled at the marketplace. The baby horse, the colt, ran under the wagon, and the owner of the wagon was now claiming the colt as his property. The king, who wasn't really listening very well, carelessly pronounced, "The man who owns the wagon is the owner of the colt." When Marcella heard of the king's foolish decision, she decided she needed to teach him a lesson in good judgment. She called for the man who had lost the case and whispered a plan to help get the colt back. But remember, she warned in parting, you mustn't tell the king who gave you this advice. That afternoon, the king went out riding to hunt. Before he had traveled far, however, his horse became tangled up in a fish net spread across the dusty road. "What in the world are you doing with a fish net spread across the road?" he asked the man standing at the net. "I'm trying to catch fish, my king," the man replied. "And how do you expect to catch fish in the middle of a road?" "Well, sire, it's as easy for me to catch fish in the road as it is for the wagon to give birth to a colt," was the man's answer. The king recognized the fisherman as the plaintiff who had come before him that very morning, and he realized that he had made a poor decision in the case. He promised the man that he would have his colt returned to him, but the king also knew that Marcela must have been at the bottom of this, for only his wife was clever enough to think of such a witty plan. He rode straight back to the palace, growing angrier and angrier as he thought of his wife's disobedience. "You promised me you wouldn't interfere with the affairs of state, and now you have broken your promise," he fumed. "Get out of my house. Take whatever you want in the palace, gold, jewels, whatever pleases you. But get out of my sight. Our marriage is finished." "Very well, my lord," said Marcella, bowing her head sadly. "I will be gone by morning." That evening Marcella cooked the king a delicious meal, seasoning it with plenty of salt. She served him his dinner with 2 bottles of wine, 2, and the salt made the king so thirsty that he drank up all the wine, and soon fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. As he slept, Marcella bundled him into a cart and pushed him to her father's house. The king woke the next morning to find himself in Marcella's father's little cottage, surrounded by the pumpkin patch. Of course he was very surprised. "Marcella, what is the meaning of this?" Marcella kissed him soundly. "Well, dearest king, you told me to take whatever I wanted from the palace, and I wanted you. I hope you don't mind too much." The king realized that once again his clever wife had outwitted him. He took Marcella and her father back to the palace, and he decreed from that time forth Marcella should be the chief justice and decide all court cases. This she agreed to, and everyone lived well and happily. That is the story of clever Marcella. May you also be so clever and use your wit for good. Ta ta!